Good morning and welcome to MyS webinar, Focus 8 to 10, Be Prepared. So just in case I encounter any new technical difficulties, this is my second webinar lesson. I'm much more comfortable and much more used to being in the school face-to-face with the students. So if you have comments or questions, send them in the chat. I'll get to them. I'll share them with everyone can see them. And maybe there's something that we'll talk about there. So let's get started. Be prepared. Now this focus activity talks about being prepared for a job interview. So what are some things you need to do to be prepared for a job interview? What are some things maybe you shouldn't do to be prepared for a job interview? Okay, so if you have any ideas, go ahead and send them over in the comment box. All right, in this focus activity, be prepared. I'm prepared today, I hope. As I said, it's my second webinar, so bear with me while I kind of get used to all of this. My name is Terry. I'm from the United States, and I'm from Seattle, which is all the way in the northwest, almost to Canada. Seattle is home to the Space Needle. It's home to a lot of different sports teams. It's actually on the Puget Sound, which is a very large inlet from the ocean. And if the name Seattle seems familiar and you can't remember why, maybe it's Grey's Anatomy, maybe it's grunge music, Kurt Cobain, Nirvana. Seattle is home to a lot of famous things. So, not me though, I'm not so famous, but that's okay, I don't want to be. All right, so be prepared. In this activity, we're going to review modal verbs, going to review some different ways to give advice, and we're going to talk about being prepared for specific occasions. All right, for now, I'm late. In your opinion, what are the worst mistakes someone can make when attending a job interview? Let's see. If anyone wants to send me a message, what are some mistakes that people make when they're preparing for a job interview? I think the first one right there we're given is maybe not being on time. What do you think? In different parts of the world, time is viewed quite differently. So, for example, in the United States, we are ridiculously time conscious. My grandfather used to say, I come from a military family, okay? And my grandfather always used to say, if you're not early, you're late. We were supposed to be 10 minutes early. And so it's, if I wasn't 10 minutes early, I was already late. This is a really important thing for a job interview. What are some other important things for job interviews? Let's look at some of the mistakes that are listed. No, they're not there. All right, so how about this? How about how you dress? Is that important for a job interview? Do you have to dress differently for different kinds of job interviews? What about hygiene? What about your hair? What about makeup for you women out there? Maybe some of you guys, don't know. How about what should you take with you? Should you take a copy of your CV and cover letter? So all sorts of things that you can do to be prepared. Maybe you're a little nervous before a job interview. Is it a good idea to have 2 glasses of wine with lunch before your interview to calm your nerves? Maybe not, huh? All right. So now, some do's and don'ts for preparing for a job interview. When preparing for an interview, there are a few important things to remember. You should always go over potential interview questions and practice your answers. You ought to dress nicely. Unless you live in Hawaii, you had better not turn up to an interview in shorts and a t-shirt. It's also a good idea to keep up with recent events in the company you're applying to. By doing this, you will come across as a knowledgeable, intelligent candidate. Remember, first impressions are very important, so follow these simple steps to make sure you stand out from the crowd. All right, so a lot of phrasal verbs, some modal verbs. Let's look at let's dissect, let's take apart this paragraph. All right, still hoping for some comments from any of you out there. First of all, we're going to look at phrasal verbs in the text. There's a phrasal verb in the text which means to arrive, one that means to review, one that means to give a certain impression, one means to be different, and one means to be up to date. So I'm hoping that over here in the comments, I'm hoping to see some people give me their answers to these phrasal verbs. I know there's a little bit of a time lag, so if you send some answers, send a few answers at one time, and that way I can pop them up here from your thoughts and not give you the answers. Coffee time. Hope you're joining me for a cup. All right, so to arrive. When preparing for an interview, there are a few important things to remember. Okay, unless you live in Hawaii, you had better not turn up to an interview in shorts and a t-shirt. So to arrive is to turn up. Be careful, you also turn up the volume on the TV, okay? But in this sense, to turn up means to arrive, okay? How about to review? To review. All right. You should always go over potential interview questions. To go over means to review, to look at. Okay. To give a certain impression. What kind of impression do you want to give at your job interview? You want to give a certain professional impression, right? Okay, so that first impression, they say, is the most important. So to give a certain impression, can you help me find this in the paragraph? You should always go over potential interview questions and practice your answers. You ought to dress nicely. It's also a good idea. By doing this, you will come across as a knowledgeable, intelligent candidate. To come across as. To come across, okay, is to give a certain impression. How about to be different? Can anyone find the phrasal verb for to give or to be different? To be different. Remember, first impressions are very important. So follow these simple steps to make sure you stand out from the crowd. To stand out. Oh, I sure can, Seamus. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. Okay. So make sure you stand out from the crowd. Here's the crowd. Here's you. Whoop. Set yourself apart from the crowd. Stand out. Be different. All right. And the last one, to be up to date. To be up to date. When preparing for an interview, there are a few important things to remember. You should always go over potential interview questions and practice your answers. You ought to dress nicely. Unless you live in Hawaii, you had better not turn up into an interview in shorts and a t-shirt. It's also a good idea to keep up with recent events in the company. So to keep up with is to be up to date. All right. So we're going to try to use these phrasal verbs now in phrases. So I'm going to read the sentences to you without the phrasal verb. And hopefully over here in comments, you'll begin to tell me, for example, number 1, the answer is. Number 2, and this way we can see, we can check to make sure that you understand how to use these in phrases, all right? So, do's and don'ts. These are also pieces of advice for preparing for a job interview. All right, number 1, a well-written CV will help you from the other candidates. What will it help you do? It will help you from the other candidates. Number 2, you should never late to an interview. Number 3, you ought to the information on your CV to make sure it is correct and up to date. Number 4, in order to be a good candidate. Valentina, thanks for sharing. Which number is that? All right. In order to be a good candidate, you must new developments in your industry and pay attention to body language. Sit up straight, make eye contact, smile. Oh, smile, I wasn't doing that. And don't fidget. This will help you confident and focused. All right, so number 1, a well-written CV will help you from the other candidates. From the other candidates. So if all the other candidates are here and you are here, it helps you to stand out from the other candidates. Let's go on to number 2. All right, number 2, you should never late for an interview. I would say you should never arrive late for an interview. So which phrasal verb means to arrive? That's to turn up. You should never turn up late to an interview. Good advice. All right, you ought to the information on your CV to make sure it is correct and up to date. We could say you ought to review the information. So which phrasal verb means to review? You ought to go over the information. All right, in order to be a good candidate, you must new developments in your industry. You must be aware of, you must stay up to date. Good, keep up with, excellent. All right, you must keep up with new developments. And number 5, pay attention to your body language. Sit up straight, make eye contact, smile, and don't fidget, don't fidget. This will help you to appear confident and focused, to come across as confident and focused. All right. As always, as we go along, let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so going along. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so what do you think makes people stand out in an interview? All right, and going back, just to let you know that there is a little bit of a time lag from when you send a message in chat and when it arrives to me. So send those messages anyway, okay? So what are your thoughts? Here are 5 questions. As always, just put a little number and what your thoughts are. That way I can link these together for us. So what do you think makes people stand out in an interview? I think there are some positives and some negatives that make people stand out in a good way or stand out in a not so good way. So perhaps, what do you think about arriving right at the hour you're supposed to start the interview? Does that make you stand out? What about arriving with your little brother or little sister? Sorry, but mom and dad had to go to work. Does that make you stand out? How about arriving in a nice suit and tie with freshly trimmed, freshly cut hair? So, some things that make people stand out: body language, appearing confident, knowing the job requirements, and being able to talk about not only the job, but also the company itself. I think that people can talking about your goals is important. Absolutely. Often in job interviews, they'll ask, where do you see yourself in 5 years? If you have thought about your goals, what you want to do, you will be prepared and you will definitely stand out. Thank you, Valentina. How about question 2? Have you ever turned up late to an important event? I have. I have been teaching at Soti, which is a private university here outside of Florence. And one day, it was raining and all of the buses were late. And I should have arrived at 11:15 in order to set up the computer, have my lessons ready when the students arrived. And because of the buses, I arrived literally at 11:01. Was not a good thing. I turned up late to teach. To help me stand out, I like to dress professionally and appear confident. Sometimes you're not dressed professionally, or sometimes you're not confident, Sarah. No, I understand. And confidence, sometimes we say in English, sometimes we say, fake it till you make it. And that is specifically about confidence. Sometimes you have to put your face on and appear confident, even when inside you're just not there yet. So, good. Dress professionally and appear confident. And if you're not, fake it, pretend until you feel it really. All right. Do you ever, or do you often go over possible questions before an interview? This is called preparedness. Going over all of the possible questions that someone might ask in an interview and saying your answers out loud. The more that you say them out loud, the more natural, the more spontaneous they will seem when the interviewer asks you. So that is a great piece of advice. So, is it better, in your opinion, to come across as excited and eager, I'm really excited. I want this job so much. I know so much about it, and I am the perfect candidate. Or to come across as quiet and confident. Yes, I understand the job requirements, and I feel that I have the training necessary and that I would fit in incredibly well in this company. Do you think it's better to come across as excited and eager or quiet and confident? I would really like your feedback on this. So, still looking forward to your comments. And I think sometimes whether you're excited and eager or quiet and confident will also depend on the job, will also depend on the company. Okay, quiet and confident. I vote with you usually, Valentina. I think it depends also on the job, though. For example, if you are applying for a job in an elementary school, in a daycare environment, they might want someone who is excited and eager. If you're going to work in a bank, in an office, I think that quiet and confident is really important. Ooh, good question, Sarah. What are your weak points? This is a really good point. So, when you go for an interview, two of the questions that I have heard the most often in interviews are what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? It's really important in a job interview to always try to turn a negative into a positive. And you can do that with this question. So, for example, what are your strengths? That's always not easy, but it's always an easy question. So you can always, my greatest strength is my perseverance, my persistence. I never back down from a challenge. I work until I understand and until I complete the work in the best way possible. What are your weaknesses? Well, I tend to be a little bit impatient. But usually this impatience is with myself. And this makes me push myself to work harder, to better understand my job, to better understand the tasks. And in this way, I become a better employee. So always try to turn a negative into a positive. So think about what your weak point might be and think about how you can turn that into a positive. All right. And so, why is it important to keep up with new developments in your industry? Would you want to go to a doctor who graduated medical school 20 years ago and had no training after? This is the same in any industry. Okay, it's the same in every industry. There are always advances, whether they're technological, whether they're just knowledge, whether they are different ways to explain, different ways to understand. So it's really important to keep up with changes in every industry. Okay, all right. So great comments. And keep the comments coming, keep questions coming, anything that's not clear, I'm really happy to explain. Okay, now, prior planning and preparation. So which modal verbs do you know? Which semi-modal verbs do you know? Okay, I want you to send me some modals, any modals. I know that with the time lapse, this is difficult. So I'm going to give you a couple of modals that come to mind. Should we use for advice? If you don't feel well, you should stay home. Must, good. According to current guidelines, you must stay home right now. Ought, good. Ought to, might, may, fabulous. This is great, thank you. All right. So now, good, could, also. Fabulous. You guys know your modals. This is great. All right. So we can't do this in pairs, but think of some examples and just write some examples in the chat for these different interview situations. How you should dress for an interview. Something you had better not say in an interview. Oof, lots of things come to mind. Something you don't have to bring to an interview. Don't have to can be a tricky modal. So see if you can make a suggestion with that. Something you ought to do in an interview. Something you mustn't do in an interview. Something you should do before an interview. And something you have got to bring to an interview. So I'm looking forward. I'm really excited to see some of your comments over here in the chat. I'm going to give you a few of my own. How you should dress for an interview. How you dress depends on the job you're applying for. This requires some prior preparation. You should research the company you're working for. Do they have a casual environment? If it's a casual environment, you should dress casually, but a little bit above the casual nature of the company. This shows that you understand the casual nature, but also that you want to stand out from the crowd during your interview. If it's a formal environment, always make that little extra effort. A nice scarf for the ladies, a really nice tie for the gentlemen. Something you had better not say in an interview. So it's nice to notice things that the interviewer has in their office. It's okay to say, wow, you have a lovely family if you're looking at a picture. You had better not say, oh, your son is so adorable, and then find out that it's a girl. Better not. Depends on the company. Exactly. I had better dress appropriately. Fabulous. Okay, something you don't have to bring to an interview. That's the one I really hope that everyone will try to answer. Tell me something you don't have to bring to an interview, and I'll come back to that at the end. Something you ought to do in an interview. You ought to sit up straight. You ought to answer the questions. All right, Jacob, you should dress a suit for your interview. So this is, and I don't want to call you out or pick on you, but this is a common mistake in Italy. You're thinking indossare. And when we say this in English, we say you should wear. We use the verb portare, not indossare. You should wear a suit to your interview. Thank you for making that comment, because that is a really common error. Thinking in Italian and using the Italian translation to English sometimes doesn't work. And that's a particular verb, a particular change in verb that doesn't work. So you should wear. Think about portare, not indossare in that sense. Something you mustn't do in an interview. Well, I think that it's really important. You mustn't drink during your interview. I don't mean coffee or water. I mean, it's probably not a good idea to drink a beer during your interview. That's okay. It happens to most Italian speakers that they forget that one. All right, something you should do before an interview. There are a lot of things you should do before an interview. Primarily, You should always go over your CV, make sure that it's up to date. Before an interview, you should always practice interview questions. You should always review information about the company. All right. And something you have got to bring to an interview, I think you have always got to bring a printed copy of your CV. The interviewer probably has it, but it shows a little bit more that you are prepared. All right. Now, I don't see any comments yet on don't have to, something you don't have to bring to an interview. Don't have to can be a tricky verb, or a tricky modal, because it's the one that means you have a choice. You mustn't fidget during an interview. Very good. All right. Something you don't have to bring to an interview. You don't have to bring letters of recommendation, but you can, okay? Don't have to means it's not necessary, but you have a choice, okay? All right, going on. So here, you work for a job agency. These people all have an interview coming up this afternoon with you, all right? Give them some advice to help them be at their best, okay? So what could they do differently? So choose any of the pictures and give us some advice using your modal verbs. What should these people do a little bit differently? All right, I'm gonna take a look at this. And oh boy. I've got a lot of advice, especially for the gentleman in the middle. All right, I'm waiting for some of your advice, but I'm going to start with that gentleman in the middle. And I'm going to say, oh, young man, I think first you need to take a shower. Your hair is an absolute mess. So I would suggest, if not a haircut, I would suggest at least a brush. Great Saturday afternoon attire, but you might want to put on a pair of pants. You might want to brush your teeth, as I see a beer bottle right there by your shoe. And I think that's probably not a good idea. So maybe sober up a little bit. All right, still looking forward to your advice. Some modal verbs. Good, you should sit properly. All right, don't fidget. Mustn't wear shorts and you have to have a shower. Excellent advice. What about that gentleman on the right? He mustn't eat. Well, not only good, he mustn't eat, but now he has to change his tie. The jam, the filling, the marmalade from inside his donut is all down the front of his tie. So now he also must change his tie. What do you think about the lovely young lady on the left? I think she's dressed very well if she's going out with her friends. I think some jobs she might be okay, but some jobs she might want to tone it down. Tone it down. That means to be a little bit less colorful, less vibrant. Maybe take the flowers out of her hair, okay? All right, good advice, everybody. Let's go on. Thinking about she shouldn't be exuberant. Oh, maybe she's a fashion designer. Excellent. If she's a fashion designer, I think she's got it nailed. Good. Shouldn't be exuberant. Excellent. All right. So remember, think about clothing, attitude, appearance, and body language. Seeing a lot of good advice over here. Thanks, guys. All right. So we're going to choose. Oh, I'm touching my face. We're going to choose a situation And normally I would have you write a short paragraph giving advice. So what I'd like for you to do is to try over here in the chat. I would like you to write at least one piece of advice using a modal verb and one using a phrasal verb. If you can make one phrase using phrasal and modal together, well, extra points, bonus points, yay! All right, so let's start with, oh, my favorite. Let's start with the first date. Okay. So any questions about the assignment? Over here in chat, I want you to try to get a sentence using a phrasal verb and one using a modal. And if you can do them together, bonus point. All right, first date. You work for a newspaper and your boss has asked you to write an article on dating advice. Help all those singles out there find love. Think about clothing, timing, gifts, activities, conversation, what to do and what not to do. All right, so a first date. Oh, exciting, nervous, right? So it's an important event and we really need some good advice. I'm going to start with what not to do. I think that it's really important not to go overboard. What does that mean, to go overboard? To do too much, to try to come across as something bigger, grander, different than you really are. That first impression is really important. And so it's important to just be yourself. You should turn up on time. Excellent. You should be yourself. Fabulous. All right. How about activities? What's maybe a good first date activity? I think that perhaps a first date activity, you shouldn't go to the cinema. Why not? Well, how are you going to get to know the other person if you're sitting in a dark place and talking and shh, probably not the best idea. All right, so what are some other pieces of advice? Maybe use some different modal verbs: might, may, can, could, should. We're using should a lot. So ought to, have to, don't have to. How about gifts? Catfish? You shouldn't catfish. All right, so this is probably, let's see, Seamus is Irish. I'm guessing this is an Irish idiom because I have never heard it before. All right, so you shouldn't catfish, pretend to be somebody else. Great. What about conversation? You can talk of your hobbies. Excellent. Maybe what shouldn't you talk about? What mustn't you talk about? Maybe in English, we always say there are 3 topics that you mustn't talk about on a first date. Can you guess what any of those are? Bonus points to the first person who can guess all 3. Okay, we'll come back to this at the end. You should be keen on what your partner is saying. Absolutely. Listening is so important. It's killing me that I can't listen to all of you, but I'm reading your comments. So, all right. Why is it important to show it, to be keen on what your partner is saying? You must show interest. If you seem disinterested, you probably won't go on a second date. Worse yet, If what they're saying is not interesting, you probably don't want a second date. All right, great comments, everybody. Oh, stood up. Yeah, that's a bad thing. All right. You shouldn't talk about your ex. That is the best advice I've seen all day. All right, so now I'm going to tell you the 3 things that in English we say you mustn't talk about on your first date. Politics, religion, and money. All right, so let's go to a different be prepared. Let's go to a driving test. Okay. Driving test. You are writing an informative brochure for your driving school. Tell students how to best prepare for their final exam and help them get their license. All right. Think about study, practice, road laws, what to do, what not to do. Still seeing a lot of shouldn't over here, so give me some of those other modal verbs, okay? Again, a sentence with a modal verb, a sentence with a phrasal verb, or both together, better yet. All right, so driving test. I'm going to say the best piece of advice is the same piece of advice that I would give you for studying for English, and that is you mustn't wait until immediately before the exam to study. You have to study a little bit over time and incorporate practice, study, practice, study, practice. This is the best way to improve at anything. All right, so give me some of your best advice, modal verbs, phrasal verbs for your driving test, all right? You must wear the seat belt. Belt security, in English, seat belt. Really good piece of advice. That's important not just for your driving test, but all the time. All right, what else? You have to try, you mustn't cut off anyone when you drive, when you turn. Great, all right. Perfect seatbelt. Keep that advice coming. How about, what do we call the, not the freccia, the turn signal. So give me some advice maybe for the turn signal. How about parking? Give me some advice. So in America, you have the marked places to park. If you then park your car next to the other car in the street, the police will come and give you a ticket within 5 minutes. And within 10 minutes, there will be a truck to take your car away. It's very different. For me, this in Italy, that people park their car and put on their flashers, it's crazy. But anyway, all right. So give me some advice. Yes, I know, Sarah, that also on the sidewalk. I was walking home yesterday from the bus stop and a car, literally walking on the sidewalk, and a car came and got right in front and parked on the sidewalk. I had to go around in the street to get back on the sidewalk. They park everywhere. All right, you ought to respect the speed limit. Perfect, Valentina. Okay. What other pieces of advice? You have to park in the middle of the road. I would say you don't have to. The Italian law, maybe it says you don't have to. That means you can if you want to. Good, Sarah, thank you. A little humor this morning. All right, so let's do one more. We've got about 5 minutes left. So let's try to do one more. All right. Let's return to the job interview where this whole thing started today. So do you remember some of the phrasal verbs we started with? How can you stand out from the crowd? How can you come across as more confident? Don't forget to turn up on time. All right? Incorporate those modal verbs with those phrasal verbs for some final job interview advice. All right. Job interview. You are writing an article for a career magazine. Tell people how they should prepare for an interview and help them find their job, not just their job, their dream job. That's your job right now. Think about timing, clothes, what to bring, body language, information, questions, what to do, and that's so important, what not to do. All right? I'm waiting on your advice. You're going to help me find my dream job. What should I do? What shouldn't I do? Must. What could I do? What ought I do? And what don't I have to do? Maybe I don't have, you should be quiet. I should be quiet during an interview. Shh, quiet. Okay. Quiet, calm, reserved. This is good advice. Maybe not to be all during an interview. Probably not. Good. Okay. What else? What other advice do you have for me this morning? I would say that I don't have to arrive 15 minutes early, but maybe I ought to arrive 10 minutes early. Also, bonus points if you can think of something that, a piece of advice for after the interview. Okay? We've got just a couple of minutes left. And if it's not here in the chat before the end, I'll give you the most important piece of advice for a job interview. All right, so timing, always be a little bit early. You should turn up at least 10 minutes before the interview. You ought to dress appropriately, and that means understanding the company and the position you're applying for. If you want to stand out from the crowd, you should research the company, not just the position, but the company. Understand the company's goals, the company's mission, the company values. This is really important if you want to stand out from the crowd. You shouldn't wear casual clothes. Good. You should ask them questions. Excellent, Sarah. That is perfect. During the interview, they always say, and do you have any questions for us? If your answer is no, that shows that you have not prepared for the interview. All right, in this last minute, I'm going to give you the best piece of advice. After the interview, whether you feel it went really well or whether you're not so sure, always send a thank you. Always send an email to the interviewer, thanking them for their time, asking them if they have any further questions of you, and telling them that you look forward to hearing from them and you are available at their disposal for any further questions. This is a really great way to remind them how much you appreciated the time they gave you. And I appreciate the time you've given me this morning. I appreciate your sharing this morning with me and all of your comments. Thank you so much, and tune in again tomorrow. Have a wonderful day and stay safe out there.